Hi, and welcome to the Animal Welfare Junction. This is your host, Dr. G, and our music is written and produced by Mike Sullivan. So this is Season 1, State vs. Steffen Baldwin, Episode 2, The Rabbit Hole. As I mentioned in the last episode, these cases have elements of animal cruelty and domestic violence. So please take care of yourselves, and if this is too hard, hit pause and come back later. So on the last episode, we spoke with Remi's owner, Lisa, about the events that led her to start looking into Steffen Baldwin. And today we have with us the officer that helped reveal all of the things Baldwin was up to and what became a much more complex case than was initially thought of. So I want to introduce you to Jim Conroy. Thanks for being here and welcome to the Junction.
Thank you for having me.
Can you start by letting our audience know a bit about yourself and what brought you to where you are today?
I have been a police officer for 32 years. In the last, this is my 12th year at the Campbell Police Department, which is Northeast Ohio, Mahoning County. We're a small city located next to Youngstown. We are on the east side of Youngstown. I butted up against it. And, I'm probably going to finish out my career here eventually someday when I retire. But I do all kind of different things for the city as far as investigations. So, and animals are one of them. So I get the animal investigations in the city of Campbell.
There's so much stuff about this case, and you cannot talk about one thing without getting into another topic, into another topic, into another topic, because everything just kind of, there were so many things in every one thing, right? Like it's just so complicated.
Yes, nothing is straightforward. Nothing is simple. I stopped talking. At one point, I just decided I'm not going to talk to anyone about this case because I always felt I sounded so stupid because I was all over the place and I just couldn't explain it any one way. And even when I initially started talking to the prosecutors in Union County and Melissa, I always felt like, God, they probably think I'm so stupid. Like I'm just all over the place, like ADD, like you said. It's unbelievable to stay on topic. You can't, because it is one rabbit hole after another. And there is not a story that's not like that you could just go off in 10 different areas, 10 different ways. And from those, you can go off in 10 more ways. It's hard to stay on point. It's hard to stay on topic. It's hard to sound like you know what you're talking about, because you could just start getting caught up in so many other things, so many other directions.
So in our last episode, we talked to Lisa about everything that happened and then how once she had all this information, she found you and she got you to take over this case. So what do you remember about that first interaction with her?
A mutual friend I had talked to, it was like the day before, actually April 12th was when Lisa and Angelo had met with Baldwin at an IHOP in Boardman, Ohio, which is a suburb of Youngstown. And the day before, I had been talking with a mutual friend of ours, and I had never met Lisa and Angelo. I didn't know who they were. They lived 3 blocks from the police department, but I never met them. So the day before, a friend of mine was telling me a little bit about the Remi story and about Baldwin, but I don't even think she told me the name, and that, tomorrow was the big day and that they're going to find out. She had feared that Remi was dead. So a couple of days later, I reached back out to her and I said, hey, what happened with that? And she was like, yeah, he's dead. And that the humane agent, had him euthanized, and that everybody was really upset and nobody really believed the story. And then later on that night, she had texted me and said, would you be interested in trying to point them in the right direction, which way to go? And I said, yeah, sure, have them call me. So Lisa and Angelo had called me and talked to me on the phone. And at first, Remi's whole situation had started in the county north of us, which is Trumbull County, and we're in Mahoning. So, I had heard about the story from my friend leading up to it. And so I thought this was all taking place in Trumbull County. I had no idea it was Mahoning County. So after some conversation about, do you know anybody in Warren or Trumbull County that can help you? And they're like, no. And I said, okay. They're like, well, we live in Mahoning County. And I'm like, okay, do you have a sheriff's department? And they're like, no. And I'm like, oh, well, where do you live? And they said, Campbell. And I said, well, you're talking to the right person, so I can help you. And then that's kind of where it went from there. So they had told me the whole story. And then what I had asked them to do was gather as much information as they could. And that, it was very complicated already to begin with, just because of the transfer of ownership from Remi to Baldwin. So I had to look into some things first, just to make sure that, I wasn't going to go down a path that, there was no use in it because of a transfer of ownership, because I know how the laws are for animals in Ohio. And it's really hard to hold anyone accountable in Ohio when it comes to animals and animal cruelty or killing of animals. So I asked them to get as much information as they could. And then I looked into it with our lieutenant at the time, who's our chief of police now. But at the time, he was our lieutenant. And we determined that we felt that at that time, it was a theft by deception from what we knew, and some maybe various other crimes that we thought of, just dealing with Remi. So a couple months later, I finally met up with them, and they handed me like 3,000 copies of documentation. And then we did the initial police report. I believe that was like June 8th of 2017. And then from there, I started looking at and going through the documentation. It was kind of overwhelming because there was so much. And in that documentation, there was, all these comments from people stating that, Remi's not the only one. There's other dogs. There's other dogs missing. We don't know what happened to our dog. And then within all of those documents, I found 2 other dogs that were dead and were posted on Pet Finder as being adopted. So I knew they were dead and that they were posted as being adopted. So I'm like, okay, then we have 2 dogs other than Remi. So there could be something more here. At that point, I went back to Lisa and Angelo and stated that, look, I think there's more here. However, if I go this route, it's going to take a lot longer. I said, we could just go straight Remi case. I said, but from what I'm learning about him, he could just end up pleading it down. He may get a few charges on him. He'll say it's just one incident or one mistake. And, nothing will probably really happen to him. There'll probably just be, misdemeanors. In the county where I work, it's a very violent county. And so that tendency is to focus on the charges that are more serious. Animal cruelty, it doesn't really get taken seriously in Mahoning County. So I just felt that with just Remi alone, that, they may not get what they want in the end result if it's just about Remi. So I explained that to them, and they agreed to go ahead, go forward with it. And then so the next step for me was I reached out to the Ohio Attorney General's office, and then I also reached out to BCI to see if they would get on board, because that would be the only way that I could then continue to investigate outside of Remi, because we're in Mahoning County and Baldwin is in Union County.
And can you let our audience know what BCI is and what their purpose is for?
Yeah, Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation is our state investigative law enforcement agency. So they have jurisdiction throughout the state. So if anyone works for BCI, they have divisions like Southwest, Southeast, Northwest, Northeast. Anybody from BCI could, really investigate anything within the state of Ohio. And then for a police officer to do that as well, you have to have BCI on board with the investigation. And then the Ohio Attorney General's office, they have a special division that's just for 501c3s. And then that's who I also called to as well to speak with them to see if they would get on board. And they did. And then BCI also did. And it was about the end of October so both of them were on board with the investigation. And then we met down in Columbus in middle of November to present what I had to the Ohio Attorney General's office and their attorneys. And then that's kind of how it all started from there.
So at that point, you have Remi, and then you have 2 other potential dogs, and now you can look into everywhere. So what were the steps after that? Like, how the investigation start from there?
Well, the next step was that we had to get more information. So all I had were those documents that Lisa was providing, and a lot of people that were saying different things, but nobody was saying, I know for a fact, or I saw this or that. It was just like, I heard this, I heard that. So I had been calling anybody that had made any type of statement that had any type of knowledge about any animal. I called them and see if, they had any information to provide to me. So that's how I started talking to individuals. and getting more information and gathering more information. Of course, your name kept coming up as far as somebody that I needed to talk to. Union County, I knew nothing about Union County other than it was kind of a rural county. What I had read about Baldwin, he seemed like a star. At first, I felt really bad because I knew nothing about him. And so when Lisa had given me those documents and I had been reading all these things, and of course I went to his Facebook page and I looked at all those different things. And I thought, wow, this guy's really doing some awesome things. And I felt really bad, like, are we going to wreck this guy over? He made one mistake. And that's how I started. That was my original thought. He made a mistake. So obviously I was going to do the investigation, but it bothered me that oh man, someone's doing such good, and this could all come undone. So it was a personal struggle, but it wasn't going to stop me from what I have to do, which is investigate it. But it bothered me that someone this good or someone this great with animals, could end up getting in trouble. And so I started talking to these different people, getting more information here or there. And eventually the next step was we felt, we didn't know who was involved because we know that, there's a board. We figured he probably had people that helped him out. We knew he was partners with you. He seemed to be partners with the dog warden, at least we thought at the time. And we knew he was a star. So we didn't know how Union County would feel about us coming down there and saying, hey, this is what we got on your guy. You're, the big star that you guys have down here. So those were all unknown questions at that time. So I believe that the next interview, other than Lisa, which we had done, I believe, at the end of August with BCI in the Attorney General's office in Campbell. That was, of course, recorded. The Attorney General's office had talked to some various other people too that had to do with the board. And then they came back and said, nobody really knows anything. We don't really have anything here. And so that was kind of surprising because, okay, nobody on the board knows anything. And, they're kind of thinking that, this is kind of going nowhere. This is my impression of what the Attorney General's office thought. The first two people, well, let me back up. So the next person to interview after Lisa was you. And that was, I believe, December 13th, 2017 at your place when BCI agent Dave Horniak and myself came down and interviewed you in like a back room of your place. And again, we didn't know if you were a part of this, we had full knowledge and you guys were doing this together. We just didn't know. So we came into it with an open mind of, we don't know what can come out of this, but, of course, we did interview you. You were very forthcoming, very upfront, matter of fact, very succinct. You knew what you're doing, very cooperative. You gave us everything that we asked for. You let us talk to your staff. Your staff talked to us, gave us all your financials, everything to do with Baldwin. It was just nothing but total cooperation. So right there, that's a big sign to us that you don't have anything to hide. And we don't know that at the time, but that's just the impression that we came out of there with, is that, if you were involved with him and doing this, you sure don't act like it. I mean, you act like somebody who's been victimized, and you went into the financial aspect of it, which at that point, we didn't know that much about, hadn't even started looking into that at this point. So when we came out of there, we felt like, okay, well, now we have a lot more information that you gave us to go forward on. So then Agent Horniak and myself began talking about the next steps, which were, okay, getting this information, putting it together, and now approaching Union County with it. Okay, so that was the next step. So I ended up with a friend helped me put together, I think it was like 93 or 98 page presentation slideshow. And so we went down to Union County. I want to say it was January 17th or 18th of 2018. And so myself, Agent Michelle Ferraro, and Agent from the Attorney General's office, and Agent Dave Horniak from BCI met with Dave Phillips, who's the Union County prosecutor. So at that time, going down there, we had known through you that Baldwin was now moving to California. And I think the date that he had originally planned was like February 15th. And the last day he was taking appointments was February 12th, which was a Monday. So our plan was to do a search warrant on February 12th, which was that Monday. So we went into that meeting with the Union County Prosecutor's Office, not knowing, so they're going to just get out of here. We're not going to do anything. This is, he's great. This is our guy. We just didn't know. And then that could absolutely happen, but it was just the opposite. Dave Phillips was just very, very super nice guy, very open to what we had to say, listened intently. So after seeing the slideshow that we had presented to him, he said, well, before he even said that, I said, well, there's one thing you have to know, before we go any further, and is that Baldwin is leaving for California in mid-February. So look, we're January 17th or 18th. We know he's leaving the 15th. And I fully expected him to say, okay, well, he's leaving, just let it go. Because that's really how law enforcement treats these types of things. So when I asked him that question, I just kind of held my breath, thinking, what is he going to say? And he's like, no, keep going. That's what he said. And I was like, all right, that's fantastic. So once he said that, then I knew that, this was going to be full blown. And now we were going to actually start really getting into this investigation because they are on board now. So we left that day feeling, okay, pretty good. And let's get into this.
I remember the day that you guys came over because, I was expecting, since I had been talking to Lisa a little bit, that there was going to be this investigation and stuff. And I didn't realize how, all the different things that eventually were found out about this. But for me, as you say, as far as us being cooperative, it was super important for me as an individual, as a veterinarian, and as a business owner to show that we were doing things correctly and that he had scammed us too. Because I was very concerned about just the pattern of criminal activity that he was following, right? Like before that, I was concerned about him stealing money from the nonprofit, using it for personal use and that kind of stuff. But Remi was the first time that I realized that he was actually harming these animals. So yeah, it was, I don't want to say as much like it was scary, but it was like, that's when stuff got real. That's when it was like, yeah, these people are going to look into this and something's going to come about it.
That's good. I'm glad. I know, to me, eventually I know how this hurt you and your business. And during the case of the investigation, I always felt bad that I could just not speak up and say, hey, she's a victim, because I know that you were getting bashed as far as being associated with him, and people were linking you to him and being part of this. Now I'm getting down a little bit farther, but I heard all those things and read those things that people were saying, and I was just like, I just wanted in the worst way to go, like, look, she's a victim, but I couldn't do that. But I, at some point, we knew that you were completely hoodwinked by this guy. And it's basically out of just trying to do what's good and right for the animals. And you're a very giving person and a very caring person, which I came to find out, was we had many contacts with you from after that day of just trying to get an understanding of, okay, what does this mean? What does that mean? I don't understand this. Like, how is Topsail Ohio Shelter coming into this? Where is this coming from? And so there was just so many different rabbit holes in this case. It takes you all over the place, and you were very, very helpful. You and your staff, Michelle Scott, was that her name? I believe. Yes. Mm-hmm. Very helpful. And I asked so many questions, like about this dog or that dog, and you put me in touch with some of the other veterinarians, other staff, other employees, vet techs. So we pretty much talked to and spoke to everybody that had any idea of Steffen Baldwin that worked for you. So you're very forthcoming, very upfront with us, and very much a victim. We knew at some point during this that you had nothing to do with this, and neither did any of the board members and any of the volunteers, which was surprising to us that this really was a one-man show. He did this all himself, and he did it by lying to every single person that we're talking about, to you, to your staff, to the board members that were really in name only.
Yeah, and it was frustrating. It's always frustrating when you know that you cannot talk about something, because on my end, especially with working with animal cruelty and neglect investigations, I know that I don't want to share a lot of information out there because it can damage a case. And it's like, people accusing or saying things or asking for information, and it's like, I can't give any information out because I don't want to do anything that is going to keep him from being held accountable for his actions. So for several years, there were people saying like, "Why didn't you say anything?" or "Why didn't you do anything?" Not knowing what we were doing behind the scenes, working, trying to get information, and then once you started doing the investigation, working with you to try to hold him accountable for it.
And that's, and I know that was hard for you. I know it was hard for Lisa Kargakos and Angelo too, because when I originally went to them and said, "Hey, I think there's more. I think we need to go further. If we really want to try to hold them accountable, it's better if we have more than just Remi." And they were on board with it, but I don't think they were on board for 3 years. And nor did I know that it was going to be 3 years. And when I first had taken the Remi case, I thought, okay, this might be about 3 months. And then we found those other two, and I'm thinking, okay, 6 months, but then that timeline every few months kept changing and being pushed out further because of so much that we had found. And it was just the full amount of what I know and what we have in documentation will never be known. I've told people that, trial probably brought out maybe 10 to 15% of what he actually did. Just because of all the different rules that most people don't understand when it comes to trials and courts and witnesses and things. Like, a lot of things don't ever get in. And that is definitely the case here. Even though it was 3 weeks long, I would say that 85% at least of the things he has done is not known at this time. So there's just a lot to know out there. And, no newspaper article or, even a podcast, I don't think could ever cover the depths of the things he's done. It would probably take us a couple 100 hours for me to explain it to you, if not more, because it's just that complex of a case. And as you titled this podcast, Rabbit Holes, that's what it was. I could work on something and I go down this rabbit hole, I see something else. And it might take me 2 more months before I get back to what I was working on that night because of all these other things that came from something I found from working on this one thing.
So let's go back to, you meet with Union County and you know that you have the go ahead from Union County, and then he's getting ready to leave in a few weeks.
So when we left there, Dave Horniak and Michelle Ferraro from the Ohio Attorney General's office, knew the next step was a search warrant. So I started working on that, and Dave Horniak helped a lot. And we were and again, because this case was so complicated already, it was a complicated search warrant. Nothing was simple in this case. And I struggled with it because, search warrants are usually about one incident or one investigation about, one thing or something around one thing. This was about many different things already. We had 3 different dogs. And we had, after we interviewed you, we had known he had stolen, had not paid you the money that he had owed you from the Art of Act. So we knew that was like $16,000. So there's a lot of money there right off the bat from the first thing that we're told about. And then you had also mentioned that he had done other fundraisers with you and you had never been paid on any of them, which is true, then I would come to find out there was like six fundraisers he ran with ACT Ohio and Rascal Animal Hospital or Rascal Charities. And you guys never received a dime from any of them. He kept it all. Even so much as the one where you guys did the hoarding case. And a year later, he publicized that on a GoFundMe and brought in a couple $1,000s from it. And just didn't share it. You didn't even know about it.
I didn't even know that he had done that. That was a surprise when you brought that up to my attention.
So with all those things, it was already complicated search warrant. So it was a struggle to try to write it because at that time, compared to now, I knew so little at that time. And, this was all new to me too. And it was just coming in waves of information and it was kind of overwhelming. So we were writing the search warrant. Dave and I would talk on the phone, almost every night and just try to go over and work it out and how to write it. So we knew we were targeting, based on what you had told us, February 12th was his last appointment. So that was a Monday. So that was the day we were going to do the search warrant. So in that time from January 17th or 18th, then we were working on the search warrant. And then it was February 7th of 2018. So we had about 10 inches of snow that night in Youngstown, where I'm from, where I live. And so like all the schools were closed that day, and you just couldn't get around. And it was like, I'll still never forget it. It was like 11:40 in the morning. And I got a call from the dog warden of Union County. It was Pete Lenhart. And he's like, hey, I know that we had talked about it, because he was in the meeting too with the prosecutor's office. He's like, I know that the search warrant's set for the 12th. He's like, but I have just went by his house and he's got a moving van in his yard and it's fully packed. And we're like, oh man, okay. So what are we going to do? Search warrant's not done. And nobody packs up the truck and you don't sit on it for 5 days. So we're figuring he might go that afternoon, that evening. I called Dave Horniak, said, hey, what are we going to do? Can we afford not to do a search warrant? And both of our answers were just like, no, we got to do it. And I'm like, well, we're not done with it. And he's like, all right, well, let me see what I can do. I'm going to call the Union County Sheriff's Department. And he called Lieutenant Mike Justice, who's now the sheriff of Union County, a super guy, great guy. And then I called Dave Phillips and said, hey, we think he's leaving maybe tonight. Search warrant's not done. It's, the rough draft is done, but, it needs cleaned up. He goes, send it to me. I'll work on it and come on down. So I'm 3 hours away. But remember, there was 10 inches of snow and it's still snowing. So I immediately get in the car and then come on down. Dave Phillips had touched up the search warrant and I went over it, made sure everything was good and it was right. And then I met with Judge Frazier. So this had to be like 5 o'clock in his chambers. And we're just hoping that he approves it. And again, it's just not a simple search warrant. It's just very difficult. So I don't know if he's even going to approve it, but he does. Dave Horniak did an amazing job with the Union County Sheriff's Department. So he got Union County Sheriffs and BCI to come up with their mobile evidence unit, and BCI agents, and Ohio Attorney General's office, Michelle Ferraro was there. I was there. So we had probably a team of 20, 25, and they had actually put a team of 2 detectives on Baldwin's house to make sure that he didn't leave. So they were staking his house out, and he had left, but he left the truck. So they just stayed there at the house and kind of figured he was coming back because somebody came to meet him. And then they got into his car, and then whoever met him left their car there. And some dogs got into the car and they left. So we knew he hadn't left yet. So we were there. So we were going to serve the search warrant, which then we did. We drove up, which was like 20 minutes from the sheriff's department. We drove to where he was at, which was, I think, State Route 739. And so when we got there, it was a pitch dark. It was really dark out. It was like 6 degrees out that night too. It was freezing cold. And then we went, and then there was no answer. There was nobody home. And then Mike Justice called Baldwin on the phone because Mike had his phone number because he was a humane agent. So he had dealt with Mike here and there. And he called Baldwin and said, hey, we're here to do a search warrant. And I can hear Baldwin arguing with him on the other line, but I couldn't hear what he was saying. But I can hear Baldwin, was really arguing with him. And Mike just said, I don't care about any of that. He goes, listen, we're going to go into your house, whether you're here or not. We're giving you the opportunity to come home. He goes, but if you're not here and we go through that door, we know your dogs are in there. We can't promise you what's going to happen. So what are you going to do? And he's like, all right, I'll be right there. But he was arguing about coming there. But then he did come. So we had to go wait. So we went away from the house and we sat and we waited for like an hour until he showed up. And then he showed up with his attorney at that time. Then we went to the house. We presented him with the search warrant. And then we went in the house. And we had a meeting beforehand. And the meeting was that, okay, here's what I expect that we'll find and that we want. Okay, we want all his electronic devices, phone, laptop, cell phones, iPads, any computer, anything, desktop, we want it. Any document, we want it. Any paper that's there, paper document, we want it. Also, we felt that we might find drugs and we'll find guns there, which we did. So we got all of those things during the search. And then because the van was packed up, not the van, it was a moving truck. So it was a pretty decent sized one. So we took it to the sheriff's department because it was so cold outside. So we didn't get done with the search probably until 10 at night. And the entire time he had all of his dogs inside in crates So they barked the entire time. It was so loud because there was 10 inside. And then Andy was a dog from Youngstown. It was a feral dog, was outside. And she was in the kennel by herself in the backyard. So we took it down, the truck, the moving truck, down to the sheriff's department, where then we unpacked it. So we took everything out of it and photographed everything and went through all the different things that we could. One of the other things that I was hearing about was that, he was lying about being in the Army. So we didn't know that that was true either at the time. And then in that search, we had found some things that indicated that he was in the Army. So that kind of threw us for a loop, because all of the information we had at that point in time was that he was lying about it. And the thought process of that was justified, because he had a LinkedIn profile that showed that he had a degree from West Point from 1998 to 2001. Well, everybody knows West Point's a 4-year school. You got to go to it for 4 years. You can't graduate in 3. So how does he have a degree in philosophy in 3 years from West Point? So that just seemed off from there. And then he was also talking about being, a paratrooper and different things like that. And it's like, okay, well, how could you do both at the same time? How could you be in the Army, being a paratrooper, but then also being a cadet at West Point? So there's all this unknown about that. And so we saw that, there's some pictures of him in the Army from unpacking all those different things. So that's kind of what I focused on. There was a lot of us doing that, just pulling everything out and taking pictures of everything, which would later come in very, very handy for us, because there's a lot of what we didn't know are things that he stole from ACT Ohio. So when you purchase things as a 501c3, you have to have a receipt of it. It has to be for that 501c3. And then in Ohio, when any organization, stops existing as a 501c3, you're required, by Ohio laws, to then donate all of your property that you've bought or purchased, your assets, to other like charities. And if you don't do that, then you're required to present a list to the probate court in Union County, so then they can distribute it. Well, of course, of which he did none of that. All of that stuff, or not all of it, but a large majority of it was on that truck, which we didn't know at that time, including the gun that he had purchased with ACT Ohio money was on that truck too, as well, that he eventually, was convicted of the theft of that gun, but we did not know it was stolen at that time. But we took the pictures of the serial number. It was loaded. There was one in the chamber, but unloaded it, took the bull out of the chamber, took the pictures, and again, that came in handy, taking all those pictures. All the documents that we also pulled off the truck were very helpful as well. And the one other thing to note was that when I was searching, Agent Horniak came up to me during the search, and he's like, "Hey, this guy's really got a problem with you." And I'm like, "Why?" He's like, he's just blaming you for all of this. I'm like, "For what?" He says that you've got a personal vendetta against him and that you're the cause and behind all of this. And I'm like, okay, I didn't really know where that was coming from. I've never spoken to him in my life. And so I just thought that was unusual, that, I could tell there was hostility just in the way he was looking at me. And so I would later come to find out, we can get into later, of where this was coming from. But so that was a surprise. And so at some point during the night, again, Agent Horniak comes up to me and he says, "Hey, I'm trying to get him to talk to us. You ready to interview him?" And I'm like, "Yeah, let's sit down and let's talk to him." And he's like, "But I don't know if he will, because he really does not like you." And I'm like, "Okay, well, whatever. We're still going to interview him." And then at the end of the night, when we were done with the search, now we're talking, this is like 2 a.m. now, and we were in the one of the bays of the inside of the garage at the sheriff's department. And then so we walked up to him and his attorney and said, "Do you want to sit down and talk?" And his attorney said, "I gave my client the advice, and Baldwin said on the advice of my attorney, I'm not going to answer any questions." So the attorney gave us the information of, his address of where he was going, gave us his phone number, and that was it. He was free to go. And he asked if he's free to go. And we're like, "Yeah, he's free to go." And I believe then the next morning on February 8th, and he then left for California. So again, long-winded story, like all of them are in this particular case. They all are. All of these stories are going to be long.
Yeah, I mean, nothing is simple, and it's because there's just so many angles to everything. So was he able to take that moving truck?
Yeah, we only confiscated the marijuana that we took and the documentation and all of his electronics. So he had no phone. He had no laptop. He had no iPad. So he didn't have any of those things with him. But we got everything that we thought we would have or that we wanted. And what was, again, later I would find out in a message, like he would talk about that night of the search warrant in his messages to other people, when he would say like how we got nothing, and it was a joke, and they got nothing on me, and they got nothing. And, that's why I was allowed to leave. He always played it down of what we were doing. Either, to the people he would talk to, he was blaming this all on me, as this was a personal vendetta on my part. And that I was, I guess Lisa and Angelo had put up a $5,000 reward. So he had me taking that, that I was taking that reward, is what he was telling people. He had me doing this on my own time, off the clock, where he got that from. That I was doing this like as a private person. So he had all these stories that he had created about what I was, my part in the investigation. And this is what I would come to learn of him, is that he was always blaming somebody for whatever was happening to him, not himself, always somebody else. So this was his defense to everybody's like, what's going on with you? Why are the police here? I heard you got, search warrant. They came to your house. And, his response to them was that, Lisa and Angelo, were vindictive and out of control and can't accept the fact that Remi was a monster, and that they have gotten me, their little private pit bull, working for, reward money, that I got a personal vendetta against him. This is what he's telling everybody. And I'm like, gee, I would find out later. I didn't know that night, because I'd never spoken to him. But as usual, what he would always do was set things up. Again, I would learn this. He would start setting up things months ahead of time.
Yeah, he was really good at sharing stuff on Facebook and getting his followers to believe what he was saying. And I mean, realistically, like anybody that has a business, you're always going to have somebody that's not happy with you. And that person, he spun it as, like you said, Lisa had this dog that was like a really dangerous dog, and he had to euthanize it. And then now they're blaming him, and they're really mad at him. And, he makes himself be the victim of everything. Right. So I understand why a lot of his followers believed him, because everything that they ever saw about him was good, was about all his pictures, supposedly helping these animals and adopting these animals and finding animals home. And then he just kept posting about rescuing animals from different kill facilities or dogs that were on death row, and, doing his little hashtag, don't euthanize me, bro. And he was just feeding off the kindness and the heart for animals that people have, right? It's like he found a great scam, because people are going to have a special place in their heart for animal causes. So he took animals that were being attacked for whatever reason, whether it was because of their breed or behavior, and then he was just taking that and running with everybody's money, really.
Yeah, and their emotion. One of the ways I explain it is that for me personally, I was an athlete growing up, and I never celebrated, anything until it was over. And I always felt that celebrating anything prematurely was always a mistake, and it always come back and bite you. And so I learned at a young age not to do that. What I noticed about him was that, as I had told other people in the case, prosecutors or other law enforcement officers, the beginning of everything he got initially involved in was like the Super Bowl. It was celebrated as an end victory. I've removed this dog that was going to be euthanized tonight at midnight or whatever. I came in at, the last hour, removed it. The dog doesn't have any of these issues. It's doing great. It's fine with me. These people were wrong in their assessment. And look at how wonderful this dog is doing. Just an hour ago, he was on death row. Now he's at my house, around another dog, and everything's wonderful. And people went crazy for it. Like, he saved another one. Well, that was just the beginning. And well, that all may have sounded good at the time, but none of it was true. All of this ended up just all being a lie. I can say that whatever he posted, And whatever he said to do, or you should do, or what people should do, or what he's doing with these dogs, he didn't do any of that. He did the opposite. Every one of these dogs that he took in, he set up to fail. Every one. I don't know that I know of any story of any one dog that he did the right thing for. Not one.
So now you have all of the documents, the computer, the phone. So what do you do with all this information that you now have?
We met like around February 20th, again, down in London, BCI. So we processed all of the documents of the paperwork because we had a lot of just documents, and we try to put them in piles to what they belong to or what they were related to. And then we put them in PDFs. So we then submit them through machine and then put them in through PDFs. So it's just trying to organize, like a whole big tub full of documents. So imagine like a 3-foot long tub, 2 feet high, full of paper documents. So we try just to put them in categories, organize them. Again, not knowing what any of them mean. None of them mean anything to us at this point in time. So there's like a lot of vet records in there that I found and other different things. But at that time, we just didn't know what it was, but we were down there. And then that's also the day that the Ohio Attorney General's office, Agent Ferraro, said that they're backing out of the investigation. So, which was a blow. I mean, because they were going to handle all the financial aspects of it. And she didn't know why. Agent Horniak didn't know why. And he tried to find an answer and could not get an answer as to why they all of a sudden just pulled out after we had done the search warrant. So this was like one of many, many roadblocks that, this case would throw us, or that we'd have to overcome. Not a lot of mountains, but a lot of valleys, cliffs, hills, downward. I mean, this was the first of many roadblocks. So we don't know why they got out. Just, hey, we're out. That's it. We're done. And no explanation, nothing. Don't know why. And the next thing I know is I got to go down and pick up the disc. They won't send it to me either. So I have to drive all the way down to Columbus just to pick up the disc of information that they have from the PDFs that we did that day. And then from that point on, Agent Horniak wrote the search warrant for Facebook. So we wanted to get all the Facebook records, Instagram records. Then we had to write search warrant for the electronic items, the laptop, the phone, the iPad. So those were the next steps. And then after writing those search warrants, then waiting to get the information back. So that was on February 20th. I think so search warrants were submitted that day, and we organized all the PDFs. And then, we just went back to doing the case again and looking through all the information. I was looking through the PDFs. Again, none of it was like making any sense to me. Like, this was just a lot of information and a lot of I don't know at this point in time. I also wanted to back up though. After the January meeting, I did call 2 people. So we started making calls. The Attorney General's office, after we met with the Union County Prosecutor's office in mid-January, and we knew we were going to write the search warrant, we started calling people too as well. And then that's when the Ohio Attorney General's office had talked to the board members and said that we didn't find anything. And I had called 2 people. And what I would find out later is they immediately turned around and called him and told him. So that's something else we could talk about later, but I got nothing from them. So like our initial contacts with people, we got nothing. Attorney General's got nothing from any of the board members, and the 2 people I called didn't want to talk to me. So I'm like, oh, this is going to be a lot more difficult than I thought. So we, did the search warrants, submitted the information. So I started going back and looking at, again, all of the comments that people were making that were of possibly they had some information. Hey, this dog is missing, that dog is missing. So I called these people, and that's kind of where it started to go from there. And then I started gathering more information, little by little. And then I'd say, okay, well, do you know someone who knows something? Do they have a story? Who do you know that knows a story? And so everyone I talked to, I'd ask them that question, and they'd give me maybe another name, another person. Some of these panned out, some of them didn't. So I was doing that, and then, going through all the documents, just trying to find other things. And then on April 9th is when the Facebook return came. And that meant from his Act Ohio Facebook, and then his personal Facebook page came. And so that's when all the messages came. And so when I first opened it up, it was 131,000 pages. And it's just like, oh my God, where do I even start? This is like absurd. And it was 441,000 messages. Now, that's a lot of information. And so, people are getting suggestions from, well, just type in Remi and just, any message that has to do with Remi. And I thought, you know what, I'm just going to start at the beginning. I'm just going to start at message one. And, I'm glad I did, because I tried that Remi thing, punching it in, but then you can get in conversations where he's having with somebody, but not saying Remi in that particular statement, talking about Remi, but Remi might be mentioned every fourth conversation, so I'm like, I can't do that. I'm going to miss. So I just started it at the beginning, and I looked at it, 441,000 messages. All right. How, if I read 1,000 messages a day, that's going to take me 441 days. So that's like a year and a half. I can't do that. So I figured out if I do like 7,500 a day, I might be able to get through this in 2 months. Now, but that's also going through 7,500 a day, and then coming across something that's of interest. So what I decided to do is just get a Word document. And anytime a message just raised a flag to me, just didn't make sense, didn't look right, I need to look at that further, I copy it and paste it onto the Word document. And that's what I did. So I would come home and I would start like at 7 o'clock every night. I'd go to about 1 a.m. Monday through Thursday. And then Friday, I would go 7 p.m. to 4 a.m. And then Saturday, I'd go from like 1 p.m. to 5 a.m. and just read messages. And Sunday, 1 p.m. to 11 p.m. and just read messages and copy, paste them. So it took me almost exactly 2 months to get through the first time through these messages, not knowing what I had just read, not understanding any of it, but putting them all into this Word document. So then I went into the Word document. It was like 668 pages of notes that were just messages that were copied and pasted. So the next thing I did was like try to put them in categories, because this is over a course of a long time that we're talking. So he could talk about one dog and then talk about that same dog a year later, or 6 months later, a year later, 15 months later. So I just tried to put them in categories and make a little bit more sense of it. And then I started getting a better understanding, a picture, an idea of, okay, this is like making a little bit more sense. Then I went through it again, a second time. I read it again. And then it made a lot more sense. So things were starting to come in. So the second time reading it, I'm like, oh, okay, I remember that from the first one. I'd go to the notes, I'd see that dog. And then I'd go to your documentation from all the vet records that you turned over, and I would look for that dog and say, okay, this dog was euthanized. Okay, so this is how I started finding these different dogs, was just by categorizing all these different dogs, all these different stories, trying to group them together, and then starting to match him up against the documentation that we removed from his house, which were vet records, the documentation that we had from you. I had called also when I went through the first time through his Facebook, anytime he mentioned a veterinarian office, I wrote it down and I contacted that vet office and I asked for all their documents. And I believe it was like 11 outside or including yours. So 11 total. So then I'd call and get all the documentation from those places as well, if they had them. So then having all that information, then when the dog would come up, and it just seemed like, okay, well, this dog, something happened to it. Oh, I found it. It's euthanized, in your records, or I'd find it in other records that it was euthanized. So then that's how the story started putting together of, more dogs were involved in this. And it was just from going through his Facebook messages. And I also found out, how he lied to everybody, and you could see it in his lies. But when he liked somebody, so if he was involved in a relationship or was interested in somebody or flirting with them, that is when he would reveal the truth to these people. But he would only give to different people, different things. So he never revealed anything all to one person. But over the course of, him chasing after all these different women and flirting with them, he would tell them these stories. And I may not have told them the entire truth, but he would give me enough to go and look at and follow up on. And that was always gold in this case, when he would talk to girlfriends, people he was interested in, especially ones that he really liked. Then you get even more information from him. And then this case was really made on what he said. There's nothing that I wrote in any report, or that I stated in any report, or that I'm stating on here that I cannot back up with using his own words against him, because that is how it was made. And it was made on those messages. From his phone, we got text messages, we got emails. So from that search warrant, we got a whole slew of other information too, which was huge to go through that as well. Then we also got a Facebook return of how it actually looked on Facebook. Now that it shut down computers. That file was so massive, it would freeze my computer all the time. And then I asked BCI to try to do something with it. It was freezing their computers. So I wasn't even looking at that for a while, because they gave us an Excel spreadsheet that just had the messages in there. So it would have the date, the time, who the message was from, who it was to, and then it would have what the actual message was. So it was that Facebook Excel messenger that I had to rely on, which was good because it cut out all the pictures and that. It was just the messages. And that's really how this case was made and where all that information came from. And then that's when I started finding, okay, these are the people that I really, need to call and talk to, the people that were behind these dogs, the rescues. So I found out who the rescues were, who the individuals were. I went through all of their messages with him. So then I would follow the conversations with whatever rescue it was, whatever person was talking to him about that dog and that person and every conversation they had. And then, it wasn't always one person. Sometimes it'd be 5 or 6 people from a rescue. Gucci, for instance, he talked to many people about Gucci. So it wasn't just following one conversation. There were 6, 7 different women that were talking to him about Gucci. So it was getting all that information, putting it together, getting an idea of what happened, and then calling those people and stating, okay, who I am and why I'm calling. And, it's about, your dog. What do you know about this? And then eventually telling them that their dog was dead. Most people were just devastated, crushed. A couple didn't believe me. One hung up on me, wouldn't believe me. I had several people that argued with me. I talked to one of his girlfriends who refused to believe anything of what I was telling her, nothing. And I kept stating, I have the documentation right in front of me. No, you don't. You don't have it. And then she would tell me things that you told her that were, you didn't tell her, because that's not what you told me. And that's not what the documentation said. And she was really difficult to talk to get to cooperate. And I believe she knew a lot, but she just would not give up anything on him. And I could see the messages that they had with each other. And he confessed a lot to her, but she tried to play it down, or state what the dogs did, or make them at fault. But they weren't even together. But those are just the different things that I came across, were refusal to believe me when I was telling him that he wouldn't do that the dog was adopted, the dog was happy. And I'm like, no, that's not it at all. I'm telling you, that's not. So some of these people I had to share information with and read messages like, hey, look, this is a message that he wrote to you on this date. And then this is a message that he is writing to another person stating the same thing about your dog. And here is I'm going to read to you from the vet record of the day of the euthanization, and so that was difficult conversations with quite a few people, because they were just crushed and wrecked, basically, emotionally. And of course, the blaming and the guilt, and, knowing that they had, handed their dog off to someone they thought was helping, and actually was the Grim Reaper for the dog. That's basically who people were handing the dog into. He said in several comments that anytime a dog was with me, no dog could ever be hurt and is in the best of hands. And I always found that to be the opposite. anytime a dog was put in his hands, that dog's life was in jeopardy, either through him euthanizing it or it getting killed at his house because his setup was so awful, and just through the recklessness and the negligence that was constantly going on at the time. He was a drug user, and he was a daily drug user. And when I say daily, I mean every single day. I don't know that there was any day that he was sober. He was drinking and or smoking marijuana. So the outcomes of dogs are things that can happen when you're high like that. The consequences are higher because of, there was at times that, he admitted to falling asleep and the dog ate all of his drugs. Those are things that he's admitted to, or has gotten into something that was toxic because he got high and passed out. So there's just those different stories that he has where it's just recklessness, negligence, let alone when he was supposed to be in decompression with dogs or training them, he would just put them together and then a huge fight would break out. So it was just irresponsibility, recklessness, negligence, sometimes stupidity. I don't know, he's smart, but at what point don't you learn your lesson from the things he's doing? Because they continue to recur over and over and over again. So it just became patterns. So I ended up reading the Facebook 4 times over. And each time was easier because then I could pick out what I knew was important and what wasn't. And then every time I'd go through, I'd find more and more. And then going through his emails and his text messages, and it was more and more, and then calling people. And then all of a sudden, after that initial, people not talking to us, once I had the information and people started opening up and providing all they knew and weren't holding back or weren't afraid because their dog was now dead and they were angry or they were upset and they can't believe it, but now they're going to cooperate.
I think that one of the things that helped on our end was that most of his communications with me was always either Facebook Messenger or through text. So it's really easy for me to be able to say, no, this is what happened, but you don't have to take my word for it. Here's the text that shows This is exactly what happened. Here's the messenger showing that this is exactly what happened. And then from a medical record standpoint, we had our medical records to show this is what he said, this is what was done, this was the outcome, regardless of what his reasoning or excuses were.
Right. And that's exactly right. And that's how, again, your cooperation, your records, matching that documentation up with the day of the incident and his messaging with whoever was involved with you or with his girlfriend or with whomever, there it is. There's no reason to lie at that point. And so that's kind of how the case was put together. Through many other ways. There's no one way to say it was put together this way or that way because of the complicated nature of the entire case, because there were so many different things. But for the animal part of it, that's how it was put together. And it was all through Baldwin's own words.